Hi, everybody. In this opportunity, we are going to discuss important topics relating to the tissues of the body. As an introduction, we can say that unicellular organisms have simpler structures and simpler function. And this is limited to the size of their cells and the amount of organelles that are in there and the associations between the cells, which limit their higher functions. In complex organisms, like in humans, cells work together to form communities working towards a more simple goal, which it's going to give us a higher complexity. Think about it as a group of people that can do certain things by themselves, and when you put them together, they are able to do higher things. You can think about this as a sports group, for example, a baseball team, where individual players could do certain things, but putting them all together, they can make even more things that they would do by themselves. So, tissues are going to be this conglomerate of cells that are working together to build larger things. Let's look at a definition of tissues. Tissues can be considered as a group of cells, similar in their structure, that perform related and similar functions. And in the human body, we have four different types of tissues that are going to perform different functions, and all of them together are going to create larger, more complex structures like are the organs. So let's have a look at this basic tissue types that we have in the human body. First, we have the epithelial tissue, which serves a more general function of covering and protection of organs and the whole organism. We have connective tissue that serves for support. We have the muscle system that works primarily with the movement or translocation of an organism. And finally, we have the nervous system, which serves the purpose of controlling the functions of the body and regulations of these functions of the body. All of these four tissues together are going to be performing higher functions to allow an organism to do a wide variety of different processes, like all the processes that are involved in an organism, a complex organism like the human. Let's have a brief look at the first of the four kinds of tissues that are going to be discussed during this series of videos. So first off is going to be the epithelial tissue. And remember that we have a major functions of the epithelial tissue, which will include protection. Think about it as your skin, and your skin protects you from environmental conditions outside of your body. Function there would be absorption, which is um, to attract to take in different kinds of material. Filtration, or being selective about things that go inside or outside of a certain portion of the body. Excretion, which is eliminating waste and also has a function of sensory reception. Again, if you think about this as your skin, you can feel things through your skin. Your skin protects you, your skin absorbs different things from the outside. It allows some things to go inside, and of course, there is also excretion from that tissue in the form of sweat. And if we look at epithelial tissue, we're going to have two major types of epithelium. We have the covering epithelium, and we also have the glandular epithelium. Even though they both belong to the same category of tissue, they will perform very different functions when we compare them to one another. The covering epithelium would cover the body and folds to create those body cavities that we have talked before, and the glandular epithelium fashions or constructs all the glands that are in the body. And glands are associated with a very special function of secreting substances from there. Let's look at some of those characteristics of the epithelia. And one of those characteristics, it's polarity. When we talk about polarity, we're talking about differences in both regions of this epithelia. When we look at that, an epithelia has an apical surface, which is a free surface. This is pretty much the part of the epithelium that kind of points to the outside. So if you think about the apical surface of your skin, it would be the visible portion of your skin. And we also have a basal surface, which is the lower part of the epithelium. And it's going to be attached to the connective tissue that lies underneath. So this will be the inside now of your body. And if you look at the both If you look at the differences in environments, if you look outside the skin, you have the environment, you have the outside world, which is a very different kind of environment as the environment inside of your body, where there is your cells doing all the processes that they need to do. And this is what we refer to as an apical basal polarity, that differences in environment. Very particular of the epithelial tissue is the presence of something called microvilli. Microvilli, we can think about them as little hairs that protrude out of cell. They're extensions of the plasma membrane, and they help increase the surface area of the cells, and they also serve purpose of moving materials on top of the epithelium. So the epithelium, based on his properties of protection, it protects, it isolates the inside of the body from the outside, kind of like creating this environment for the inner cells to do their work. Looking at the support functionality of the epithelium, we're going to look at a few different areas. So if we look at our picture there, we can see different strata, different layers of tissues down there. We have a lamina called the basal lamina, which is directly below the surface. So if we look at our picture, here we have the cells that make the epithelium, and directly underneath that epithelium we have this basal lamina, which serves that purpose of kind of like attaching the epithelium to the connective tissue that would be underneath. Now that basal lamina, it's composed of just materials. It's just a sheet of proteins. There is no cells involved in this, and they have an adhesive property for that stuff. Going even further down from the basal lamina, we have the reticular lamina, which is composed of collagen fibers, and now this would be called connective tissue. And remember that connective tissue is there for offering that extra support. The epithelial tissue and the connective tissue work together, right? They're going to work together. The connective tissue is going to offer that support that the epithelium needs to stay in place and perform its functionality of protection. So both of those laminas together, or both of those layers together, are called the basement membrane, that pretty much protects against tear and stretching, and it pretty much marks the end of the epithelium. So not only we have this layer that protects us from things on the outside or isolates the things inside of the body, but we also have this supportive tissue out there that holds it in place. Let's look at some special characteristics of epithelial tissue. First than anything, epithelial tissue, it's what's called avascular. Avascular is a word used for describing that there is no blood vessels present in this type of epithelial. It is innervated, which means that there are nerve fibers. And remember that we have a functionality of sensing in the epithelium. So definitely we're going to need some nerve fibers in there. So by having this, the epithelials will depend on nutrients that are provided by the connective tissue that it's underneath. So there is not a direct supply of nutrients that will go into the epithelium. They will need to diffuse from the underlying connective tissue. They're going to make their way up into the cells that make this type of tissue. It has a very good ability to regenerate. If in any case the apical basal layer is damaged, then the regeneration of the process is going to begin. And by regenerate, we mean heal. The epitheliums have a very good ability to regenerate or to heal um, those cells that have been damaged. But of course, it will depend on a good source or a good supply of nutrients. How do we name this epithelials? Now we need to consider two important things for learning the names of different epithelials that we have, and basically this is just characteristics or characteristic names for different kinds of epithelial. So we need to look at two things. It will depend on the number of cells that are present in the layers of the epithelium and the shape of the cells, the types of cells that would be on the epithelium. So if we look at our illustration here, on the left side coming down, we have the different types of cells. We have squamous cells, which are cells that are flattened out cells. They don't have a very round shape or a very round form. We have cuboidal cells that look like little tiny cubes. And we have columnar cells that are elongated cells with elongated nuclei and possess microvilli on the surface or the apical surface of that epithelium. So if we combine those three different types of cells with the number of layers or the number of cells or the number of layers that are one on top of the other, we have the other distinctive characteristic. We have simple and we have stratified epithelium. Simple stands for only one layer of each of the cells, and stratified, it's multiple layers one on top of the other of each particular cell. So if we look at an epithelium like this one, where the cells are cuboidal in nature and we have more than one layer, we are going to have to call this a stratified cuboidal epithelium. So it will all depend on the type of cells, on the layers of cells one on top of the other. And there is one special configuration here. We call that the pseudo-stratified epithelium. Pseudo comes from the word kind of like not real or a little deceiving. When we look at those cells, we can see the nuclei in different positions, and it may give you the impression that there is multiple layers to this epithelium, which kind of like brings out the word pseudo epithelium. And when we look at the cells in a little bit more detail, we can clearly see that it's only one layer of cell. Now let's have a look at some of the epithelium, some of the names of those epitheliums, and looking at some pictures taken from microscopes that illustrate the concepts a lot better. So for the simple epithelium, here we have it. Here we see that nice layer of cells, very organized, which is another category of the epithelial tissue. We can see a lot of organization. We can see the microvilli on the top of those cells. This would be an example of a simple columnar epithelium. And in this other picture, we have an example of a stratified epithelium, which would be this darker purple looking tissue out here. Multiple cells, just one on top of the other. So if you were wondering, what is this other kind of like lighter pinkish color underneath the epithelium? Well, that of course would be the connective tissue that it's supporting the epithelium in place. Looking at some more common cells of the epithelial tissue, this is an illustration of cuboidal cells. As you can see, nuclei look really big in proportion to the rest of the cell. They kind of look like little cubes. Sometimes they look like little circles. But we have to see that they are very, very organized, and that nuclei, it's really, really, really big. The columnar epithelium, very long and elongated cells with microvilli on the surface, and our squamous cells, which don't have a very determined shape. And they are flattened cells. I kind of like to think about them as an egg on the floor. When you drop an egg on the floor, they would look something similar to that. If we look at the simple epithelium and we are looking at functions and locations of each of these individual tissues, from the simple squamous epithelium, we can give a function of diffusion. These thin cells allow for an easy passage of materials through them. And I can find those normally in the kidneys, specifically in the microtubules of the kidneys. I can find them in the lungs for the easy exchange of gases, and I can find them in the heart as well. The simple cuboidal epithelium has a function of secretion and absorption. They either put materials out or they are designed for taking materials in. And I can find that, of course, the location in the kidney tubules as well, kind of like lining the outside of those little tiny tubes in the kidneys, in small glands, and I can also find them in ovaries with a more specific function of secretion. The simple columnar epithelium has a function of absorption, of secretion, specifically of mucus and digestive enzymes. Uh, a good location for this, it's the digestive tract. We can find them lining the inside of our digestive tract. We can find them in the bladder, in the gallbladder, sorry. We can find them in the bronchi, and we can find it, of course, in urinary tubes as well. So at least it's very important that for us to start visualizing the tissues as what do they do and where can I find them. It's the easiest way to start thinking about them and kind of like putting them into a perspective. The stratified epithelium, it's a little bit more difficult to find in some areas, with the exception of the stratified squamous epithelium. We can find this underlying in areas subject to abrasion, like we can find it on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. In other places, I can find them is in the esophagus. I can find this in the epidermis. They form pretty much the external part of my skin. The stratified cuboidal epithelium, this is a little bit more of a rare kind of tissue. I can find that in larger glands like our sweat glands or mammary glands. And the stratified epithelium would be the rarest tissue in the body. I can find this in the pharynx, in the male urethra, and some other ducts around the human body. The pseudostratified and transitional epithelium, in the terms of the transitional epithelium, it forms the lining of hollow urinary organs. They stretch as the organs accumulate urine, so this is very common for me to find it in the bladder. Just due to the shape, the weird shapes that the cells have, the transitioning shapes. If you look at them, they look like they start as little columns and then they end up being kind of like squamous in looking. This shape that the cells have allow them for that stretching that is very traditional for organs like the bladder. Cells vary in height, and this is talking about the pseudostratified epithelium. We are talking about this kind of tissue right here. Cells vary in height, simulating multiple layers, like we said before, and that very special function for them is the secretion and absorption of substances, and they are very common of the respiratory tract, where they secrete mucus to humidify the air that it's being inhaled um, as a part of regular respiration. So here I added this kind of like an organization scheme to help you visualize a little bit better the two different types of epitheliums that we have, the common cell types that are included in the epithelium, and the division of simple and stratified, and the types of tissue that I can have. Let's remember that one thing that would be really important is to visualize the tissues in terms of their functions and also in their locations. Very well. So on the next video, we will discuss the glandular epithelium. So thank you for taking your time and watching this presentation, and I will see you on the next video.